Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly break down the impact that Kai Havertz and Mason Mount had in the midfield zone in Chelsea's 3-0 win over Burnley. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Burnley in a 4-4-2 and Chelsea starting off the game in a 4-3-3. So this was about how Chelsea would break down the Burnley side, dropping off into two banks of four. So first, when we look at how Burnley looked to approach the game without the ball, it was very simple. They had the two strikers in Wood and Barnes looking to press the two center backs, but then with Chelsea having a 3v2 advantage in that midfield zone, what we'd end up seeing was that they would position themselves in between N'Golo Kante. So if they position themselves in between N'Golo Kante, then that leaves the midfield battle set with Stevens and Westwood stepping into the path of Mason Mount and Kai Havertz. So that leaves McNeil and Brownhill tasked with stepping to the Chelsea fullbacks. We did see slight modifications as to how Burnley would cope in that midfield zone. For example, if the ball was shifted out to James and Stevens shift across to close down Havertz, we would see Westwood hold the center of the pitch and Brownhill tucking in narrow to close down Mason Mount. And if you had both Burnley center forwards stepping out into the path of the Chelsea center backs, with Conte free as that spare midfielder, we would see Westwood stepping towards his path and Brownhill shifting narrow to close down Mason Mount. If Chelsea were able to clip the ball out to Chilwell, then Brownhill would have to step in towards his path, and that would see Westwood tracking back to close down Mount. Meanwhile, when you look to Chelsea's attacking structure, they were attacking with 5 men due to the advanced positioning of the fullbacks, with Conte sitting just ahead of the center backs that allowed Reece James and Chilwell to push forward to provide width. Therefore, when we look at the Chelsea attackers, you had Timo Werner just ahead of Long and Loughton. At times, he was dropping off deeper, looking to receive the ball between the lines. His predominant position was in between those two players, either looking to dart into the gap behind Loughton to receive the ball in the left channel, or a bit more narrow to break into that gap to receive the ball in the box. Tammy Abraham did look to drop off deeper in between Stevens and Westwood to receive the ball in link play. Then you would see Werner looking to drift into central positions in between the center backs to break in behind. Whereas when we look at Ziyech, he was shifting laterally ahead of Taylor and moving into central positions, and there were times if he wasn't dropping off deeper into that right channel where he was on the opposite side of the pitch looking to receive the ball. But when we look to how Chelsea were able to create some of their better chances, it involved Kai Havertz dropping off deeper to the left of Stevens to receive the ball, and then looking to make deep runs in towards the box to get onto deliveries from wider areas, or to occupy and drag out some of the Burnley midfielders and defenders. Mason Mount, on the other hand, was dropping off deeper ahead of that Burnley midfield bank to receive the ball, and if he wasn't playing cross-field switches out to Reece James, he was playing penetrative passes in towards his teammates to place them into good positions. First, we'll look at Kai Havertz, and what we end up seeing is Havertz dropping off to the right of Barnes to receive the ball from Thiago Silva, and then we witness Havertz sliding the ball across McNeil for James, and as James takes his touch across McNeil and Stevens shifts over, Havertz ends up running off Barnes into space behind Stevens to receive James's square splitting pass ahead of the Burnley backline. Havertz ends up sliding the ball across Taylor for James, and that's where you see Werner calling for the ball off Brownhill with Loughton shifting to Mount and Chilwell signaling for a pass at the back post. But James's cross is blocked by Taylor upwards, and Havertz ends up nodding a tame effort at Pope. Shortly after that, it's Zouma poking a ball across Barnes for Havertz shifting to the left of Stevens to receive the ball. This ends up seeing McNeil step forward to apply pressure, but Havertz's second touch with his left foot evades McNeil's pressure, and he ends up sliding the ball out to James ahead of Taylor, who switches play to Chilwell. If we take another look at Havertz's late runs into the box, we have Conte receiving the ball in the left channel ahead of Brownhill, and his intended target is Abraham peeling in between Tarkowski and Taylor. But we also see Havertz darting between Stevens and McNeil to occupy Taylor in the box, and that enables Abraham to step away from Tarkowski to receive Conte's looped ball into the box, and he nods a tame effort on goal that Pope pushes over the net for a corner. Now let's shift to Havertz helping Chelsea evade pressure. When Havertz drops into that right touchline position to receive the ball from Mendy, Burnley aggressively presses higher up the pitch, and he awaits pressure from Barnes shifting over and McNeil. Havertz easily shifts back away from Barnes to hold him off, and he can't play a pass to Conte due to Westwood's pressure. So he ends up splitting Barnes and Westwood to find Zouma free in midfield, who's able to run forward and switch play out to Chilwell. If we look to another example of Havertz's forward movement, this time we see him picking up the ball from Zouma in a deep inside right position, and he slides it out to James, who pulls out McNeil and Taylor. This is where we identify Havertz's forward run that drags out Stevens, and Chilwell prepared to run off Brownhill towards the back post. Now James is able to pull the ball back to Ziyech, who's free in that inside right position, and when he looks up, you could see Chilwell with space to run off a narrow Brownhill. Ziyech ends up whipping a high-quality ball over Long and Brownhill for Chilwell breaking free at the back post, but the Chelsea left back fails to get a foot on it. And when we look to one of the better chances of the game, it involves Ziyech and Havertz, and it starts with Ziyech poking Conte's clearance across Brownhill for Havertz, and Ziyech ends up getting it back. That's where we see him sliding the ball to Abraham, who drops off Tarkowski to slide the ball out to James. And when James receives the ball, Havertz ends up darting between Barnes and Brownhill into the right channel. James ends up sliding the ball across Barnes for Ziyech, who splits Barnes and Brownhill for Havertz, and that pulls out Taylor. Now we end up seeing Ziyech running off Barnes and Brownhill into space beyond Taylor to receive Havertz's poked ball across the Burnley left back as Barnes shifts across to provide cover. Ziyech ends up cutting back to evade Brownhill's pressure, and he pokes a square ball across Taylor for Havertz running off Barnes towards the edge of the box. From here, Havertz can have a shot on goal, but he ends up sliding the ball across Westwood for Mount, whose side foot bends a first-time effort at Pope. Now when we shift to Mount, it was solely about his passing in deeper positions. Initially, you have Zouma poking the ball across Barnes into Mount between Stevens and McNeil, and Mount lets the ball roll across his body to poke it across Taylor for James running off McNeil, but James whips a ball into the 6-yard box that Long clears. Seconds later, it's Conte splitting the Burnley midfield for Mount, who turns and locates Abraham peeling off Tarkowski's shoulder, and Mount ends up clipping the ball over the Burnley defense for Abraham, but he struggles to get the ball settled ahead of him in towards the box, and Taylor ends up making a recovery tackle to halt the danger. And then when we look to his ability to shift play, it was Mount dropping off Brownhill into his own half and clipping a diagonal ball out to James. This is where you end up seeing Werner breaking into the box way ahead of his marker Loughton, and with James ahead of McNeil in the final third, he squares the ball across McNeil and Taylor for Werner shifting laterally off Loughton to the center of the box, but his first touch pops up, and that halts Chelsea's attack. If we focus back on Mount's penetrative passing, this time we end up seeing him ahead of Westwood, locating Havertz breaking into Burnley's half off McNeil, and James free in the right channel. Mount ends up switching the play for James, but it swerves to Havertz as McNeil can't bring it down, and Havertz ends up sliding the ball out to James, who locates Werner signaling for the ball between Long and Loughton. James ends up whipping a positive ball around Taylor and Tarkowski, but Long makes a last-ditch tackle to poke the ball off Werner, who actually did run offside, and the ball deflects into the path of Pope. And if we shift to the second half, it's Havertz in the halfway circle sliding the ball to Mount deep in an inside right position, and he pushes forward at the Burnley back 6 with the wider players pegged back, and he ends up splitting Taylor and Rodriguez for James in right half space, and when James looks forward towards the box, he could see Abraham calling for the ball as he looks to make a run off Long's shoulder, but James's low ball through that 6-yard box evades the Burnley center backs and Abraham. However, what shouldn't go unnoticed here was the defensive contributions of Mason Mount and Havertz. When we initially look at Havertz, we end up seeing Taylor taking his touch across Ziyech to push into Chelsea's half, and at this point we have Havertz tracking McNeil. But once Taylor breaks beyond Ziyech, Havertz comes across to provide cover pressure, which leads to the ball being overrun out of play. Later on in that first half, we witness Loughton skipping by Mount, and this is where you see Havertz starting position ahead of Brownhill. Loughton ends up poking the ball beyond Conte, Stevens, and McNeil, and that's where we see Havertz scooping the loose ball over McNeil and then holding off Wood and poking the ball beyond Loughton to drop the ball off to Chilwell for Chelsea to push forward. If we look to another example, it's Brownhill ready to play a pass to Stevens, and we end up seeing Havertz starting position in Burnley's half. When Brownhill plays a square pass to Stevens, it rolls under his foot, and Havertz is able to swarm Stevens to win the ball and help Chelsea push forward. And if we look to the build-up to the corner kick that resulted in Zouma's goal, it's Tarkowski holding off Ziyech after intercepting Werner's reverse pass, but he overtouches it into the path of Havertz, who steps in to win the ball, and that ends up placing Ziyech in a 1v1 situation with Taylor in right half space. But when Ziyech receives that ball in that 1v1 situation, he fails to beat the Burnley left back, and that results in the corner kick that Zouma converts. And when we look to Mount, there are two examples in particular that we should highlight. The first one ends up seeing Stevens closed by Conte and Werner, and he ends up playing a loose ball back to Brownhill, and Mount ends up stepping in to win the ball. The other example starts with a Chilwell loose pass for Werner, and it ends up falling into the path of Loughton. At this point, we have Mount already running beyond Westwood into an advanced position. But when Loughton ends up skipping by Chilwell, Mount anticipates the danger and tracks back beyond Brownhill to make a successful slide tackle to help Chelsea regain possession. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.